When you enter the Hayes Theater to see Branden Jacobs-Jenkins play titled Appropriate, before any actors hit the stage, there's a big screen with the dictionary definition of the word appropriate. Many of the definitions and sentences refer to the word as an adjective, but then when you get to the bottom, you realize it's also a verb, appropriate. The projection signals some of the themes of the play, including that some things look the same but are very different, even if you don't want them to be. The dramedy is a raucous examination of memory, race, and secrets. 3 siblings have returned to their late father's sprawling plantation-esque home in Arkansas with different agendas. Sarah Paulson plays Tony, a bundle of sarcasm, pain, and rage who has an unwavering belief that their dad was a good man, even though the siblings find all kinds of inappropriate material as they sort through their father's things. Well, the items could be appropriate for a white supremacist. The New York-based older brother is judgy and money-obsessed and thinks maybe they could get cash for some of the gruesome artifacts. The troubled, estranged brother, younger brother, as in a guy who doesn't seem to get why he can't just hang around 13-year-old girls, says he has returned to make amends and find closure. Tony is not buying that. The family has to deal with ghosts, or they will be haunted forever. Appropriate stars Corey Stahl, Elle Fanning, Natalie Gold, and Michael Esper alongside my guest, Sarah Paulson. Hi, Sarah.
Hello, how are you?
Hello. It's directed by stage and film director Lila Neugebauer. Hi, Lila.
Hi.
Hi. And though the play was staged off Broadway in 2014, this marks the Broadway debut for Branden Jacobs-Jenkins. Welcome back, Branden.
Jacobs.
Branden
Jacobs.
Thank you. Branden Jacobs-Jenkins. Thank you.
Yes, I know.
We will get that right by the end of the interview. The play is running at the Hayes Theater through March 3rd. Branden, when you first began writing this play, what was it about? And then when you finished, how close were you to that original idea?
I began writing this play about 15 years ago, actually, kind of in the shadow of a play that was kind of sweeping the New York stages called August Osage County by Tracy Letts, Pulitzer Prize winner, Tony Award winner. And it had sort of kicked up all this interesting critical discourse around like the American family drama as sort of the like crown jewel of what we do well over here. And I thought I would try to take a swing at that with a bit of irony, because I think what was going unmarked in this formulation was the kind of whiteness of these families. Whereas, you know, we have an incredible tradition here, perhaps a singular tradition in the States of kind of drama by African Americans, but yet that kind of family drama category didn't exist within that pantheon of things, I would say, or didn't exist in an open way. So I began, trying to figure out what that meant. It felt like I was kind of making a diorama or like trying to put like a ship in a bottle for a long time. But I would say after like a couple of years of work and with the help of a lot of amazing institutions, like first and foremost the Signature Theater where it premiered about 10 years ago, I kind of wound up falling in love with the characters and the story, and it wound up becoming, it felt something more organic than an exercise, I would say.
So Lila, you and Branden have been not only collaborators but friends for a really long time. What is something about this play that is uniquely Branden?
Be careful.
Easy, Lila. Easy, Lila.
Where to begin? Let me endeavor to keep it brief, which is, of course, difficult because this play is the product of a singular imagination, life force, and mind in terms of Branden's particular capacities and his interests. So I think in response to what Branden himself just described, what I would say out loud is that it's hard for me to imagine another writer who is capable of so successfully, essentially fulfilling and exceeding the expectations and conventions of what we might say is a genre, satisfying those conventions so thrillingly, and also anatomizing that genre at the same time, which is to say there's a lot of ways to be satisfied by your experience of this play. I'm being told my audio is quiet. How's this, guys? How am I now?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes. Okay, great. So there's that. That kind of high wire act feels particularly Branden Jacobs-Jenkins to me. And then I would say that the muscularity of the writing, the extent to which the play is willing to explore the furthest reaches of these characters cruelty and their pain, their humanity, their hilarity is singularly Branden Jacobs-Jenkins. I could go on, but that's a start.
Sarah, Tony she is a lot, and she has a lot going on, as we discover over the course of the play. What did you see in Tony that made you want to play her?
Well, for me, the play's the thing. The writing was undeniably, to echo what Lila said, muscular and multidimensional. There was an opportunity, I think, for me to play someone who was unapologetic in their convictions and their beliefs, who was also, on the face of it, presenting with a particular affect of defense and, as you said, sarcasm as weapon. But the truth is, for me at least, and this is something that I don't dare to say Branden intended or didn't, although I think he intends all the things that would ever occur to me, of course. But I think this is a woman who, at the end of the day, is in a tremendous amount of pain, and who, at the end of the day, I think never learned how to love properly. And her way of loving comes out in a way that many people can't receive. But for her, it is what she's doing. She is the engine in the car, the love car, as it were, is sort of weighted down by all these other things that make it really hard to see that truth. But I think for Tony, and for me as Tony, that is sort of undeniable. And it was an opportunity for me artistically to play someone unapologetic, and who was not worried about being liked. And I thought, what a wonderful opportunity to play, therefore, a real person. I don't think people walk around wondering how they are, maybe some of them should more than they do, how they're coming across, particularly inside their family dynamic, particularly. And I thought this was just a person, he had painted such an indelible portrait of a human being to me that I think on the face of it does present with a particular kind of rage. But I see it as a much richer person.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk to you all about pacing in this play. Branden, so, as I mentioned, Tony's a lot, but there's a lot going on, and we discover it, and it's revealed slowly over the course of the script. And there are other slow reveals. How do you think about pacing, and how did you want to use pacing to tell this story about this family?
Well, I think about the fact that, they teach you in the theater, or sometimes they do, that there's two kinds of plays, which is like someone goes on a journey or a stranger comes to town, and, because it's really, you kind of need that audience surrogate to really understand what's happening. But the truth about families is it's not like the history that people have in a family goes beyond the lifespans of most of the people in it, right? And so you really can't rush the goods. To really understand. I mean, because for me, it was really this kind of intense game of portraiture. Like, I just wanted to feel that these people were real in some way, and that these relationships were real, and you could feel their various versions of themselves connecting and disconnecting in any given moment. And you just kind of have to give that time. I don't know. I feel like that was ultimately what it was like, to do justice to the characters and to the truth of their circumstances. I needed to give every layer of the onion room to kind of breathe. So that was my tack. Whether or not people love it, I don't know, but that was the aesthetic engine of it.
Lila, then your job also is to keep your audience engaged and the actors engaged as you're having to work with Branden's pacing. What was a decision you made? Because directors make decisions. That's what they do all the time. What was a decision you made that involved pacing that turned out to be the right one?
Well, first I'll acknowledge that when you say the word pacing, I am thinking of both from a purely technical perspective, the rate at which an event is calibrated musically. But, we're, Branden, and you are also speaking about the rate at which information and psychology is unfolded in front of us. So with regard to the latter, which is a sort of meatier dramaturgical question, I guess what I would say is that there is there's a clear invitation in this play based on what unfolds to judge these characters, and that it struck me as tremendously important that those of us who are inhabiting the play see ourselves as the advocate for these characters, the advocates for these characters, which is not to suggest that we shy away from their shortcomings, but in fact that for us from the inside to immediately judge these characters from the outset would in fact be to less meaningfully implicate the audience, and would in fact, I think, be to let the audience off the hook from the outset in terms of the ways in which some people in the room might in fact come to see themselves on stage.
Sarah, for you, the slow reveals about Tony, I won't give them all away, but, you know, we find out she lost her job. Her son has troubles. How did the way that we, the audience, learn about her, how did that impact the way you play her? Because you know her story. Tony knows her story, and we're just getting it piece by piece.
Well, my job is simply to play the truth of the play as it is revealed for the audience. I'm living inside of the, as you described, the knowledge. I have all of the history of Tony's, the events of Tony's life leading up to this moment, in my mind and in my body and in my heart. There's no question. But I think Branden does a very beautiful thing, which is that you meet Tony kind of full throttle with a surprising event that has happened, which is a return of her once beloved, and also, you know, the person she was sort of responsible for raising, who's disappeared, and he is now back. And that is sort of, you're meeting Tony in a moment, where you might not normally, she might not normally be behaving the way she's behaving. Mm-hmm. And so you're talking about a ratcheting up of events that cause a particular, internal boil for her that is, I don't believe, Tony's operating level. But Branden does this wonderful thing where it isn't until I leave the stage in Act 1 that you get all the audience is delivered all the information about me. And so I've behaved the way I've behaved, and the audience is witnessing that without the context of my history. And I think it's so deftly done because you basically then are asking the audience to re-engage with their understanding of who this woman is, and perhaps to put it somewhere else in their mind or their body while they're watching it, which then I think launches something wonderful for the rest of the play for her. And because I do think, sort of to speak to your earlier question about pace in terms of what Branden's done, you know, that first act goes by like a bullet train, and it does for us as actors. And I have heard audience members whom I know who will say afterwards, you know, that first act you blink and it's over. And then the rest of the play has a different energy, and that is all, of course, by design. And it's, I think it's a really wonderful thing to have the audience meet this character, as you say, who is a lot. And then you find out after I leave the stage what I've been going through, which sort of re-engages you with the audience and asks the audience to participate and deal with their own thoughts about what they have decided she is, you know, which makes it more of an interactive experience, which in my view is a wonderful, important, meaningful part of attending the theater.
We're discussing the play Appropriate. It's at the Hayes Theater through March 3rd. My guests are actor Sarah Paulson, Branden Jacobs-Jenkins, the playwright, and Lila Neugebauer, the director. So, Branden, this was staged Signature in 2014, as you mentioned, and obviously a lot has changed in the past decade. And given that 2020 really opened up conversations about race and people having conversations about race who didn't normally have conversations about race, what was something that you were able to change in the play, update in the play, or maybe even take out of the play that you were excited about? What was a change that you were able to make given how people have become more open to discussing race in the past 3 years?
That's an interesting question. I mean, there's been all this kind of discussion about how much I've changed in the play, but in turn, like a lot of it was quite superficial. Like it was always like rhythmic stuff or like line polishes. And the only two things I really was able to dig in on kind of had very little to do with that theme. But ironically, I think there was much more of a knee-jerk desire to read the play as like satire, I would say 10 years ago, which made it so difficult for people to sometimes connect or identify with some of our main characters. And I did notice that something about the way people, I think, these questions have become so undeniably personal to so many people. And like, no one's going to pretend that we didn't witness December 2020. I feel that, people were able to, it had somehow bought people a willingness to really listen to these characters as they kind of unpack their own interiors. And there's a scene between Sarah and the amazing Corey Stoll, the characters of Tony and her brother Bo, that's basically a brand new thing that I think for a lot of people becomes a real emotional hinge for the journey and kind of brings it to a place beyond laughter. And I feel very grateful to my company, especially this space director, Lila Neugebauer, for giving me the space to kind of reinvestigate that in this iteration.
Lila and Sarah, I'm curious, I would wonder what your conversations about the way Tony carries herself and her body, the way Sarah uses her body to tell us about what's going on with Tony. Maybe Lila, you could start.
Well, I will just say that we have also been blessed with the collaboration. I will let you speak to this. Sarah has a longtime collaborator who joined us on this production.
Her name is Julia Crockett, and she's a person that I worked with on impeachment, who helped me become Linda Tripp. And I had never worked that way before, of using my body as a way of communicating interior life. In a way that was conscious anyway, or deliberate. And I had this working experience with her, and I have never worked without her since, because it has been an absolute integral way for me now to find a way inside something that sort of separates the cerebral component of my acting choices and connects me more to the physical, which a lot of times when you're watching something, certainly on stage, you get a physical picture of someone's body that then sort of tells, so anyway, Julia Crockett is a person who helped me, and Lila, I was very grateful, and this is something Julia and I have talked about before, because not every director would be so welcoming of a person coming into a room and sitting there and pulling me aside and saying, I want to see more of this tension in your neck, and I want to see it more I want your fist. So we came up with all of these physical communications to the audience of Tony's tension and internal battle, and moments when she wants to reach out and strangle someone and she doesn't. And I can physically communicate that with my body. And so Lila, although is not responsible for crafting that with me, but what she's responsible for, which is almost more important, is giving the space for that to happen with such collaboration and without feeling threatened, or if she did, I never knew about it. And it was incredible, because it's as personal as my intimate relationship with Lila working on the play, because it was that necessary for me. And there are plenty of people who would not have encouraged that, much less allowed her to come into our rehearsal room and watch us work and help me figure out how to communicate all of that physical stuff. So I love the question, just because sometimes I'm out there in the void. I have no idea if it's reading or if anyone's taking it in or if they notice it or if it is telling a story, so I'm just so, I love that it was something that registered for you.
Lila, this may sound a little bit cliche, but the set itself is a character in many ways. What conversations did you have with your team about what the set should evoke, what feelings it should evoke, what it should be filled with?
What I would say is, cliche or no cliche, that's 100% accurate for this play and production, and I'm delighted that was your experience. The first thing I would acknowledge is that I worked with now frequent collaborators of mine, the Scenic Collective Dots, on this production. But we had a really incredible design team on this show, who were integral in every way to the mood, feelings, mise en scène, every aspect of this production. They are a part of crafting. With regard specifically to the set, those conversations they were rooted in dramaturgical research about, first and foremost, architecture of the period, and the region. And it was our desire that the architecture reflect that authentically. And then Without wanting to give anything away, the playwright has written, there's an epilogue in this play on the page in which things happen in that house after everybody's gone. And the playwright has given us on the page a series of unbelievably transporting provocations that a design team and a director are then invited and prompted to make manifest. In terms of what we sought to do, again, I don't want to give anything away, but I would say it is an epilogue in its own right. There's a real transformation, and there's narrative as well. And I would say it's the rare playwright that invites you to continue to create once the actors have left the stage. And that's a gift.
Yeah, the house has its own monologue.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Branden, without giving too much away, the central drama, some of the action is going around really some disturbing things that are found in the father's things that he's left behind. Stuff that I think if so many people saw it, they'd be horrified to see it. And yet every member of the family has a different reaction, and they don't get rid of it. Why don't they just get rid of it? Why don't these three kids, adult kids, just say, like, this is bad, we're walking away?
I think it's because they can't come to a consensus about what it is. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that in some ways the play itself, but also what it's trying to gesture at is just like the weird, like, Rorschach quality to American life and history. And that, like, there's no kind of consistent narrative. And so no one can kind of make action in a way that feels unified, right? It's like everyone wants to march in different directions to do the same thing. And that's something, that dynamic is something that I was hoping to kind of like out or articulate maybe in the play. And truthfully, you know, what it is they all kind of have the same ideas, but never at the same time. You know, it's like, and then by the time someone's like on someone else's page, the other person wants to do something different with it because they've learned something new about it. And that to me is sort of just the experience of what history ultimately is. Like it's so easy to treat it as a thing that's very distant from us, doesn't implicate us. But the truth is it's the story of how we got here, no matter what we're talking about, you know? And then as you kind of begin to realize, suddenly your sense of ego and self is invested in that history. And suddenly you have a point of view on whether or not it disappears. And that seems to be like the constant flow of, you know, the cycles of like American life, you know? Feels like every 20 years we're kind of revisiting the same thing and not quite dealing with it, you know. So this is that story of like, you know, the past is never the past. It's always going to haunt us and resurface somewhat like, you know, the cicadas that are omnipresent in the work itself.
Well, it's really interesting the way you write it, that the family just sort of casually talks about how there are enslaved people buried. They just kind of say it and move on. What does this tell us, Branden, about this family's relationship with the reality of their family history? They're like, oh yeah, they're out there. There are some dead enslaved people.
Yeah, I mean, these enslaved folks died many years before any of these folks were born, right? And it's funny because I think also people often want to say this is a Southern family, but the truth is that the only person who lives in the South here is Tony, and that's by choice. They all were kind of raised in D.C., which is this kind of contentious part of the country. Right. Despite being between two formerly slave-owning states. But, you know, there's a way in which this history is abstract to them, you know, and that it's very easy for themselves to put up like psychological boundaries between who they believe they are now and the very soil upon which they were, you know, reared up. Their name began, you know, as a family line. So, yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I can't tell if that's like an easy answer or one that deserves more unpacking, but.
Sarah.
You can call me Tony.
That's
fine.
Sarah. Tony's just so in my brain right now.
Good.
That's how good she is.
Yeah, right? Tony just.
Easy.
Is Tony,
Easy.
no, is Tony,
Easy.
is she a daddy's girl through and through?
Listen, I think when you're a youngish woman and your mother dies and you have two brothers, one of whom needs a great deal of care.
Mm-hmm.
The other one who might be somewhat emotionally remote to you. You know, I think Toni and her father had a special bond. I do think this. I do believe this. But I also feel there is that feeling, and this is something Branden and I don't even think Lila and I have discussed, but, you know, when you feel like you're in this constant state of loss in terms of your family story, and that, you know, when you have one parent who has died and you were sort of a budding young woman and you no longer had that connection, and you had these two boys, men in your life, I think it was probably very important for Toni to have her father be proud of her and, you know, celebrate her and feel connected to her. But I think at the end of the day, some of it is memory and what you need a person to be, what you need the truth to be, so that you can still feel that you have some thing to orbit around. You know, it's like you don't want somebody to take something else from you.
Right. She's lost
This
a lot.
is something that she has that but means something to her, that helps her identify herself in space and time. And somebody cannot try to casually take that from her, you know. And I don't think she believes, you know, you've said a couple times, and I think people say it a lot, you know, these were her father's things. And my argument is, how do we know that? We do not know that. The cousins had this property for a long time. You know, Toni's arguments make a lot of sense to me, but of course they should, because that's my responsibility to make sure that they do. But, yeah.
So Lila, someone said to me right before we went on, you heard what happened? Lila went on stage the other night. What happened? Director on stage?
Well, in the age of COVID, you
Yeah.
know, the show still's gotta go on.
And you're not the first director, right, Lila, to do this? This is you joined the pantheon of...
Yeah, I know. It's a pretty good club. I think it includes Sam Gold, Sam Mendes, maybe a few other Sams.
But maybe you're the only lady. We're going to find this out now.
Possible. Yeah.
So you went on in what part, just so folks can...
The role of Rachel, played by the great Natalie Gold.
Well, we hope everybody's feeling better.
But you can imagine what it was. You can imagine what it was like for us to sort of turn over and look over at Lila in Natalie's dress with like makeup on in a way I'd never really seen on her face. And there she is with the pages saying Natalie's lines. It was very surreal and also kind of thrilling, I have to say.
I must say the great regret in my life was not being able to see that performance, because I was in Chicago at the time. And from what I heard, I mean, I'm sure Lila must have been so surreal to step inside the like hurricane you had designed in some ways. But it was, it's like an iconic effort. I have to say it's pretty unheard of, even though we're listing these greats. But of course, I consider Lila one of the greats. So there you go. It takes a special kind of director, honestly, to be willing to do that work. It was amazing.
Well, it takes a very special company to hold you in the full hold of their embrace and and really root you on. I think it was a pretty wild time for everybody in that room.
I think we just watched you relive it. It's just on your eyes.
Yeah. That's just for us.
We got this unsolicited text that says, I saw Appropriate last week. It is brilliant, on par with Arthur Miller and Eugene O'Neill. The acting and direction are amazingly effective in getting lines heard and absorbed. A must see. So that is an unsolicited text
Excellent.
from one of
I
our
love
listeners.
an unsolicited text of praise, and I love it. Thank you, whoever you are out there in the dark.
And for folks who haven't gotten their New Yorker yet, there's a big old profile of Branden in the current New Yorker, and it drops. And the news was dropped yesterday that you are working on an adaptation of Purple Rain.
Yeah. Which is insane. Yeah. I don't how weird does it get, to go from this to Prince, but it's going to be amazing. I'm so excited that the news is out and it's the next big mountain to climb. Yeah.
Was that a hard secret to keep?
Well, apparently not that hard because it got out and people are excited. But I've been working on this for a little over 2 years, and the stars are aligning, and we're very happy so far. I'm working with amazing director Liliana Blaine Cruz, but of course, Prince is, how do you capture Prince and not be Prince? I mean, that is just like one of the great existential questions of human life. So stay tuned.
We will stay tuned. Appropriate is at the Hayes Theater through March 3rd. My guests have been actor Sarah Paulson, playwright Branden Jacobs-Jenkins, and Lila Neugebauer, who is a director and sometimes actor on stage. Thanks for the time today.
Thank you,
Thank
Allison.
you,
so
Allison.
much.
Such a pleasure, always.
Agreed.
We continue.